All right, we've made it to prions, and this is going to be the last part of this lecture. Prions are, from my point of view, scary. They are the scary things for several reasons. They're not the only microscopic things that can kill you or ruin your life, but in some ways they are scarier than other things that can kill you or ruin your life, and you will see this. So, prion is a transmissible spongiform encephalopathy. So take a moment to pause and break that down. Encephalopathy, or encephalopathy, depending on where you're from, should tell you it's a disorder of the brain. It's transmissible because it can go from person to person. And spongiform, that refers to what the brain looks like under histology when it's been infected with a prion. It has holes in it, full of fluid. So here are the major prion diseases that I want you to know. Scrapie is the oldest, best-known prion disease, or was the best-known prion disease. It was the first one discovered. Scrapie is a disease where sheep uncontrollably itch, and so they will scratch up against a fence post or something until they destroy their skin and they die. This is a human disease, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, and variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. Variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease is the disease people got from eating beef harvested from cows that had mad cow disease. Kuru was a disease that is becoming rare now among a small group of people that ritualistically ate the brain of a dead person in a funeral. So if a very wise person died, they would ritualistically eat parts of that person's brain at the funeral, and that tribe or group of people ended up having a really high incidence of this disease, Kuru. And once that connection was made and they stopped doing that, the disease is becoming rare again, which is good. Mad cow disease, its real name is bovine spongiform encephalopathy. Chronic wasting disease affects deer and elk, and get ready to learn things you don't want to know about chronic wasting disease later in this video. Fatal familial insomnia would be the scariest thing I'd ever heard of if it were more transmissible. But this mostly has a genetic component and happens to people who are very unlucky. So all of these have a long incubation time. So between when you're exposed and when you experience the first signs and symptoms, could be 6 months, could be 10 years. In some cases, there have been documented 40-year incubation times. So that is, if you think you've been exposed to a prion, you have no way of knowing until it's too late. And you may not know for 10 years. So that's, to me, what's so scary about prions, that every prion disease is invariably fatal, and every prion disease has a very long incubation time and no way to know if you're infected or not. So what prion diseases typically do is attack the brain, and so they cause a loss of alertness, strange behaviors. The animal or the person won't eat, and so they lose weight, and eventually they die. And on the histology of their brain shows brain tissue looks abnormal. So, historically, what caused these weird diseases with the long incubation times? This was discovered fairly recently. I believe in the 1970s is when that research into them started, because people thought they were a virus. Viruses were very hard to study until the 1970s. So it was easy to think there was a virus that hadn't been discovered yet. But in fact, they're not caused by a virus. They're caused by something else. So they are caused by abnormal proteins. And the researchers who discovered this got a Nobel Prize because it is an entirely new form of disease-causing thing. So prions are misfolded proteins that can cause properly folded proteins to misfold. So, whoops. Well, shoot. So I want to draw this for you, and I hope this will work. What I have to draw is a neuron. So I'm going to draw a really crude neuron, I guess like a motor neuron with a long axon and a cell body and some dendrites. Super crude, and it's got a big nucleus full of DNA, because it's a nucleus. That's why it's full of DNA. Okay, so that's a neuron. This would be one of the interneurons in your brain, and they do kind of look like motor neurons. Anyway, so the thing with prion diseases is they affect a very specific protein that's already found in neurons. And so it's only mammals that we see this particular thing going on, because there's this protein called PRP. The protein is the PRP protein, which stands for prion protein. We don't know what it does, or if we know by now, I didn't learn it back when I was learning about this, and I haven't seen a simple explanation. But it's common in the membranes of neurons in the brain. So this protein is in everybody's neurons, in everybody's brain. And normally it doesn't cause any problems, because normally it is what we call the C version, PRP-C, the cellular version. So PRP-C is the cellular version of the prion protein. So prion protein C, PRP-C, cellular version. So there would be several copies of that in a neuron membrane. Lots of copies. I mean, realistically, millions of copies in a neuron or something like that. Okay, great. So that's normal. That is the normal situation. The not normal situation is when, I don't know, I come up with some scary color like red. When a prion protein is a different version of PRP-C. It's prion protein, and it's called prion protein SC for scrapie, because that's where it was discovered. And what this protein can do is if it bumps into PRP-C, PRP-C changes its form. It can be changed to PRP-SC. And that PRP-SC in turn can change another PRP-C into PRP-SC. And this ends up changing all the prion proteins, or all the healthy versions, the PRP-SC into PRP-C. How does that work? How is it possible that a protein could come in and change the form of all of these proteins? And that's what I wanted you to see with me drawing before I show you the detail. Because all it is it's refolding the protein. So it takes the normal functional PRP-C and misfolds it. So it has some shape, some folding. And then if it misfolds in a certain way, now it's PRP-SC. So it has the same amino acid sequence, but a different folding. And that PRP-SC can go on to convert PRP-C into PRP-SC. It catalyzes the change in folding. This is mind-blowing. And there are people who have found similar proteins in yeast and other cells where there's no nervous system. So they don't cause a disease, but they can be misfolded like this. And they study them to try to understand them, because no one could have ever designed this or even predicted it. So this is some of the worst luck humanity has had. So again, we don't really know what the healthy version PRP-C is for, but and we don't know exactly what happens when it gets converted to PRP-SC, but we know it doesn't work anymore, doesn't do its normal function, and it starts to form weird aggregates, most likely. And ultimately, the neurons die. So PRP-C has some essential function keeping a neuron alive. So you can just imagine what happens if you have proteins in the cell membranes of neurons in your brain that are killing neurons in your brain and converting them into that same protein. It just spreads from that area. And yeah, so PRPC, the prion protein, there are different versions of it, but most of them seem to be incredibly stable. So they're resistant to heat and radiation. They are harder to inactivate than endospores are. And that, again, is horrible luck. Yeah, and to me, they're very scary. They're kind of irrationally scary to me because of the reasons I just showed you. Invariably fatal with that long incubation time, so you get to wonder for 10 years what's going to happen. So some of these are spontaneous diseases where that PRPC will misfold for some reason in part of the brain, and there's a genetic component to that. And in other cases, it's just a transmissible thing. So again, Kuru was a disease caused by a funeral practice of ritualistically eating the brain of the dead relative. And it is rare now. Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease is a spontaneous disease, so it doesn't seem to be initially contagious. So in most cases, it doesn't seem to be contagious, but there have been known examples of transmission where someone with this disease was being operated on, and someone was cut by a surgical instrument that had cut through this person's tissue, and that person got Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. So it can be transmitted in blood or any exposure to infected tissue. So this causes again, slow deterioration of the brain over a period of years, and it's horrifying. Chronic wasting disease is one we should think about. So Kuru, you're not at risk of Kuru if you don't do those things, and Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease is incredibly rare. Chronic wasting disease is not rare, and it is definitely concerning. So this is a deer or elk disease where they behave strangely and lose weight. And so part of their strange behaviors is they don't hide. They're not good at the things deer normally do, so they get killed by hunters. So hunters have to know about this, because you do not want to eat an animal that has one of these diseases, because you don't know which tissues those neurons are in. And so far, there are no known cases of a human getting chronic wasting disease, but it's a relatively new disease. It has only, well, it's currently spreading across North America pretty rapidly, and so there are a lot of places where people haven't been exposed to it yet, and other places where people started being exposed to it in the late 20-teens. And so if it has a 10-year incubation period, we still don't know whether people have been exposed or whether they'll get a prion disease from these deer and elk. In 10 years, we will have a pretty good idea, but right now, we don't. So what we do know is that if humans can catch this, we will, because deer do release this into the environment in huge quantities, and it is stable outside. And so people who are around infected deer and elk certainly have been exposed to this protein. And it is rapidly spreading. So this is from a lab that helpfully compiled the data in graphical form. This is the only place I've found it in these nice maps. And it just shows in the year 2000, it was in a few states and provinces. 10 years later, it had spread a lot. And as of 2021, it's in Idaho and Manitoba, in addition to all these other states. So that's chronic wasting disease. Oh, I should also point out, it's in Idaho, which means it will be in Oregon and Washington and California eventually. Fatal familial insomnia is a truly horrifying disease where people lose the ability to sleep. This is kind of unusual in that it has a clear genetic component, and I'm not sure why a specific part of the brain can be more susceptible to it than another part of the brain. I'm also not sure how this leads to death, but it does. A person will progressively lose the ability to sleep, and you can imagine what happens to their quality of life when this is happening, and then eventually necessary functions of life fail and they die. So truly the worst. In the UK, there was a transmissible spongiform encephalopathy related to cows, and this is just a story everyone should know. Sheep have always been susceptible to scrapie. Everybody who's around sheep knows this. And so you wouldn't eat a sheep that has scrapie, but somehow people got the idea that a good protein source for cows would be butchered sheep. And that, to me, doesn't make sense because cows are herbivores. But still, what are you going to do? And so it is thought that mad cow disease, or bovine spongiform encephalopathy, came originally from sheep, when the cows were eating sheep brains, which is insane. And 10 years later-ish, people in the UK started getting a higher incidence of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, but it was more progressive and faster than Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease typically is, and it happened to younger people. So this is called the variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, and it seems to happen when people eat infected animals. So this is what we would wonder about. Will people who are around infected deer with chronic wasting disease, will they get variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease? I don't know. And then, yeah, so someone who has one of these diseases will see brain shrinkage, but also these accumulated, basically empty areas in the brain that fill with fluid. And so that is prions. Prions are something to avoid. Remember, long incubation times, extremely stable in the environment, and remember how they work, and remember the prion diseases. And I will see you later.